Hey there, fellow fans. A fan with too much time here, coming at you today with a new extra talk. But not just any extra talk. This one will inform onto the next episode of my personal fan series, Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k. So if you're interested in that kind of information, pay close attention. However, before we begin with the actual juicy meat of the content I plan to bring to you today, let me take a moment here at the start of all of this to say a few words. My Kickstarter for my personal original comic book series has been a complete success. Thank you all so much. I can't believe how quickly you all answered the call. I asked for help in that video, and many of you chose to give it to me, and I am so grateful for that. I honestly, I pride myself as a wordsmith. I really don't have the words to make you understand how much this means to me. It really is. It's just, man, it really, helps in so many ways, just both mentally and rawly physically. You have enabled me to take the next step in my creative writing career, and I thank you deeply for that. In the greatest way that I can, in the most way that I can. And frankly, I think the only way I can properly thank you is by continuing to write, continuing to put out content in all its forms. And I fully intend to do that for many, many years. Thank you so much. As a quick update, I will say that thanks to all the donations I received from so many dedicated fans, the actual stretch goals for the entire Kickstarter have been completely fulfilled, all of them. So everybody who donated, you're getting extra. You're not just gonna get like what you normally get from your tier level, but you're also going to get the benefits of the stretch goals. Thank you so much. And for anyone who still hasn't gotten in, we have some really great benefits in the tiers. You will get a physical copy, or, depending on what you donate, you get a physical copy of my comic and even more stuff. And I just want to let you know at this point, because, well, buying in at this point means that you also buy into all of the stretch goals at no additional cost, thanks to the donations of so many people who've come to give and be generous. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And if you still plan to get a copy of my comic, go ahead, move on it quickly. You've only got about, at the time of this recording, maybe 40 hours, probably less by the time I finish editing it and putting everything together. So, once more, thank you so much for your donations. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to the actual content. So for this topic, I'm going to open up with a little bit of a controversial statement. Maybe not even a little bit of one, maybe a lot of one. And that controversial statement is basically this. Despite their many flaws, in direct spite of their many, many flaws, there are a few good concepts in the sequels, and perhaps none have more potential than Palpatine actually being all of the Sith and the revelation of the Force dyads. Today I only plan to cover one. I will cover the other one at a later date, pretty soon probably, but I find these topics to be extremely interesting, that the concepts of Palpatine being all of the Sith and the revelation of the Force dyads themselves and their existence, and I think it fits in really well with the lore. But today I'm going to stick to one, and the one I plan to stick to is this idea that Palpatine is all of the Sith. I'm going to talk about Palpatine, his creation, his power, and also use this moment to help set the expectations for both my Star Wars and my Warhammer 40k fans, and make clear the portrayal of Darth Sidious that I will be including in my own fan series. That's how this ties in. So that's why this is going to be an important one for people who want to have a proper expectation for what is about to happen in the series at the current time. So, and I'll try not to get into any spoilers beyond that for people who haven't caught up yet. So, let me warn you now, Palpatine is extremely powerful, and you will likely be shocked by his Legends and canon feats, and you may even realize why, in both Legends and canon, he has always required the use of his own power turned against him to actually be defeated. Let us begin with the original concept I introduced to you earlier, and talk about why I think Palpatine being all of the Sith is a great idea, and one that meshes well with Legends and current canon both, despite the fact that it was introduced to us in what is perhaps the worst of the three sequels, though it is always in heavy competition with the self-absorbed dog shit that Rian Johnson fed to us when he decided to discard everything laid out before him, both in all previous movies and in all previous canon, to remake Star Wars in his image. But I'm not going to get off on that. Let's just continue with this. After all, we are talking about the dark side today, but no reason to get that dark. Now, we see that the dark side is corruptive. Let's begin there, okay? That even a well-intentioned person seeking more power through the dark side to do something that we might see as admirable is likely to harm or destroy the very thing that they're seeking to obtain or protect if they delve too deeply into the dark side, or if they can maintain their actual original goal prior to their corruption. It likely comes at the cost of everything around it, including the context in which they even wanted that goal to begin with. And yet, in spite of this, the Sith, the most corrupted and powerful of all dark side users, at least debatably, somehow embrace the selfless tenets of the rule of two, and did so for thousands of years. Now, to remind you, the rule of two is the idea that there can only be two Sith, a master with power and an apprentice to crave it, and the way that this system progresses is that the Sith master will teach the Sith apprentice everything they know, and then eventually the Sith apprentice will duel and kill the Sith master, and thereby succeed them. Now, this is a really crazy thing because this is not good for the Sith Master. The Sith Master is effectively performing a long-form act of self-sacrifice for the sake of the Sith Order. They are finding, like taking great pains to find, and then to train the person who will fucking kill them. How? How could a being fully corrupted by the dark side choose to adopt and raise their own murderer? How could the dark side be so mastered, so consistently, that the self-destructed selfishness that is imposed everywhere we see where the dark side is concerned never overcomes or overcame any of the Sith of the Rule of Two until the time of Plagueis? What I believe is happening, as backed up by Palpatine's claim, is that this simply was not the case. The Sith never were able to actually master the dark side to that extent. It never happened. It never occurred. It's simply impossible for any Sith, any Force user at all, to master the dark side with their own will, while at the same time rejecting the light so entirely, immersing themselves in shadow so completely. No, my theory is that without the apprentice's knowledge in this master-apprentice system of the Rule of Two, a sort of soul transference would occur when the Sith apprentice would slay their own Sith master. But it's important to know that this technique, this theorized transference, is not exactly the same as the traditional soul transference and Sith possession we see Palpatine and other Sith perform. For this to work as displayed by both the movies and the animated series, the comics, and the various forms of canon and legends, I think the change would need to be subtle. That the Master's soul is not made dominant over the body of the apprentice, but rather is taken and perfectly fused into the existing soul of the apprentice, gradually changing them into a more powerful entity and enabling the Master to be subject to a continuing chain of eternal life and growing power. It is, in many ways, the ultimate final act a Sith Lord can perform. Think about it. they surrender everything, memory, personality, and even drive for the sake of raw ambition, eternal life, and, most importantly, for more power. More and more power. And thus we come to understand several things present in Legends canon. We come to understand why Darth Bane was so desperate that Darth Zana be the one to kill him before his body failed on its own. We come to understand why and how the rule of two Sith managed to produce the most powerful masters of the dark side, despite having no empires or breadth of freedom in the same way that many of the ancient Sith did. And we come to understand why Palpatine's powers and feats became so wildly impressive after he killed his own master, but not before. We come to understand why, after killing Plagueis, Sidious was given a powerful vision of dark clarity, which revealed to him the strings manipulating the universe, and the dark forces which tugged at them. Darth Sidious is not literally all of the Sith who have ever lived, but his soul is, in theory, composed of the amalgamated souls of every Sith that has ever lived under the strictures of the Rule of Two. And thus, he encompasses Plagueis, and he encompasses Bane, and he encompasses everyone between them, every single one of the Dark Lords of the Sith after the final battle of Ruusan. The transformation is subtle, like I said it has to be, subliminal, enabling the process to never be disrupted by internal power struggles between various personalities, all previous souls sacrificing their original individuality to become a more powerful Sith Lord. I'd also like to add into my theory that I believe that this does actually change the personality ultimately of the apprentice once they go from being the apprentice to the Sith Lord, even if only gradually. This is done both because they are becoming an amalgamation, but also because of all of the inherent and innate knowledge they are beginning to receive that probably manifests itself as some form of instinct or vision or visions as they go from Sith Apprentice to true Dark Lord. This process is what led to Darth Sidious potentially becoming the most powerful Sith in the history of the galaxy. With the possible exception of Darth Tenebrae, though by the time Tenebrae achieved his full power, he was hardly anything that could be called a Sith, and he was certainly not a person who considered himself to be a Sith by the time of his apex. But how powerful is Palpatine really? What has he done? What are his most impressive feats? What does it mean to be the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith soul amalgamation and teachings and learning? Let us do a quick review of the things Legends and canon Palpatine has done, beginning with his mind-affecting and telepathic powers. It goes entirely without saying that Palpatine's mind is such that, in multiple instances, he has been able to telepathically communicate with subordinates and enemies alike from across galactic distances. Additionally, he has demonstrated the ability to alter memories, twist minds, and erase entire personalities through the use of his psychic might. We all know that Palpatine successfully disguised his thoughts, intentions, and very presence from the Jedi during multiple meetings with their most powerful members, standing right before them, calling them friend, even in an office full of dwarty Sith statues. And they never caught on, even when they realized that the Dark Lord of the Sith, the true master pulling the strings behind the Clone Wars, must be living on Coruscant, might even be a senator or a powerful backer of multiple politicians. When they even determined that this Dark Lord of the Sith is probably part of Palpatine's inner circle, they still did not suspect Palpatine, at least not enough to actually truly anticipate that he was 100% gonna be the Sith Lord, or even had a very high likelihood of it as compared to people like Mos Amida and Sly Moore. But his psychic powers go far, far beyond those limitations and the skills of mere concealment and galactic scale communication. During the Dark Empire comic books and legends, Palpatine was known to be in constant awareness and communication with thousands of his commanders and special forces, at times just communicating with them in real time across galactic distances, and at times seeing through their very eyes or even possessing their very bodies. Yet, there are few telepathic tasks we have seen the Dark Lord of the Sith perform that can match the just massive amount of effect that would be required for what he did when he was hiding the Lucenkia. For those of you who do not know, the Lucenkia is a 19-kilometer-long superstar destroyer which was disguised as a massive shield generator and hidden just under a layer of Coruscant's galactic city. The Lucenkia was a top-secret weapon, and none outside of the highest echelons and related staff needed for its maintenance and operation could be allowed to know that it existed at all. And in fact, many who worked close to it were under the impression that it was some kind of base or bunker. Even they were not allowed to know specifically that the Lucenkia was actually a superstar destroyer. So how was it that billions of people living around it and on top of it never noticed the Lucenkia, not after it was placed and not while it was being actually placed down? Well, it was theorized by Wedge Antilles that the only way for the Emperor to have hidden it in this way without murdering millions of witnesses was to use the power of the dark side to cloud the minds of millions or even billions of people. And these are not just human people. These are humans and aliens of every single kind that you can imagine. All of them influenced to be blind to what was right before them, shifting an entire layer of their city. And this theory has been asserted as correct by several sourced RPG books, all of which mention Sidious using his powers to hide the burying of the Lucenkia on his capital world of Coruscant. This was done in such a way that even the Imperial Senate and their agents, most of whom lived on Coruscant at the time of the hiding of the Lucenkia, never learned of the Superstar Destroyer's existence, despite it being them whom Palpatine was hiding the Lucenkia from, due to him not wanting to make it seem like he was militarizing the galaxy too quickly. These are strong-willed people. These are people like Bail Organa. These are people who had a deep interest and deep desire to know what was going on, and this was done directly under their noses, straight up. So it really goes to show how powerful Palpatine's subtle powers of the mind are, that he can blind so many interested and uninvolved parties alike, even people within his own empire, to what was occurring when the project that was occurring was of the scale of the Lucenkia, again, a 19-kilometer-long super star destroyer. So, big fucking deal in my opinion. But moving on from his telepathic feats, I'd like to direct your focus to his more esoteric powers. For while the previous displays showcased the power of his raw will, it is only when examining his skill in Sith alchemy that we gain a true understanding of the breadth of Sidious's knowledge. Sith alchemy largely describes the act of transforming living things and objects through the use of the dark side of the Force. Through Sith alchemy, Sith talismans and abominations, also known as Sith spawn, can be created. Rakghouls are an example of an extremely powerful use of Sith alchemy, as is the Talisman of Frida Nad and the Dark Staff, to say nothing of Sidious's creations. Among these were the much-feared Shadow Droids, constructs which were horrific in that they were much more cyborg than droid. Harvesting the still-living brains of wounded TIE fighter pilots, encasing them in starfighter-like bodies and imbuing them with the power of the dark side, each of these agile, death-dealing machines were directly tied to Palpatine's will, allowing them to act as the terrible, destructive nails on the ends of his galactic spanning fingers. able to outmaneuver and outspeed X-Wings manned by any but the absolute best pilots, and fully capable of ripping Star Destroyers apart when working as a team, the Shadow Droids struck terror into the hearts of any who saw them coming, a rare enough event in itself. But the Shadow Droids were merely mechanical gnats compared to the horror of Palpatine's chrysalid beasts. These alchemical monstrosities were created within thick, unnatural cocoons, which were crafted with Sith alchemy. Powerful enough to bite through the hardest armors, with skin that could shrug off heavy weaponry like it was nothing, the chrysalid beasts were shaped from Rancors, Gundarks, Katarns, and other vicious beasts of the galaxy. Endowed with unnatural strength, speed, and powers, some of the chrysalid beasts could even move through walls like phantom monsters, making bunkers and hardpoints all but useless against their nightmarish assaults. And yet, even these monstrosities paled in comparison to Palpatine's ultimate works of Sith alchemy, which included the reconstructed form of Darth Vader, the artificial life form known as Snoke, and the mechanical world-ending machines known as the World Devastators, self-replicating droid battleships which devoured entire worlds to fuel their weapons and their ever-expanding fleet of automated death. In both metal and flesh, Palpatine was a master of creating monsters of every variation that took his fancy, and several that did not. For you see, fellow fans, Palpatine's corruptive dark side aura was so powerful that unless he intentionally suppressed it, it would literally cause the world around him, biological and inert, to warp and twist without the need of his direct effort at all. Nowhere is this clearer than at Biss, Palpatine's adopted homeworld after becoming the Emperor of the galaxy. The plants, the animals, the stones, the very weather were corrupted and changed by his sheer presence. For my 40k fans out there, imagine a chaos sorcerer of such incredible power and psychic potential that he acted as his own warp rift, changing and distorting reality without any effort or intention by virtue of presence and nothing more. On top of that, imagine that this sorcerer was such a master of his art that he could freely suppress or amplify this effect according to his whim, hiding it from the Jedi hunters who were trained to seek it out, and expanding it such that it could take over an entire world. One man. Palpatine's knowledge and immersion into the dark side can be challenged only by a handful of beings in the entirety of galactic history, rivaled among the Sith only by Valkorion, formerly known as Darth Tenebrae, and in the dark side by Abeloth herself, a literal dark goddess, and maybe also rivaled by the entire order of the Sorcerers of Rand, who may be able to perhaps hold a candle to his power when working together. One must also remember that, while feats display this are fleeting, it has been stated in both canon and the novelizations, and prominently within the Dark Empire comic series and Legends, that Palpatine has discovered and mastered nearly, if not all, previously learned and created techniques and knowledge of the Sith. This is a staggering feat that defies the limitations of time itself, unless we include the fact that Palpatine is not one of the rule of two Sith, but all of them fused together. In theory, this means he knows and has the power to tear the hearts out of stars, to consume the very souls of his enemies, and to even control the forces between life and death. And while I did state that some of these examples are fleeting, one which is not is his control of life, something he demonstrates by dying multiple times within Legends, restoring himself every time by transferring his soul into another body and dominating it. In fact, after returning from one such slaying, Luke and Leia both came to the horrifying realization that Palpatine cannot be bound by death, and by their own admission, He has become an entity that is divorced from the needs of the living, able to return at will after an amount of time has passed, seizing a clone body or a sufficiently dark soul to replace with his own vileness. And his mastery over souls is not limited to himself, a feat which is displayed when Palpatine kills and restores the Imperial genius and master engineer Bevel Lemelisk by manipulating his dead soul into new bodies. He did this to Bevel at least 6 or 7 confirmed times, and without any apparent effort or preparation on Palpatine's part, aside from ensuring a clone body existed to move Bevel's soul into. It is even implied that Palpatine had learned how to perform direct regeneration on the bodies of others, even to the point of matching his master, Darth Plagueis, gaining the ability to control biological life and death within the context of other beings, though of course, not himself, not fully. He was described as a living dark side nexus by Luke and an unnatural storm of chaotic power by Leia, having created out of himself a near god of the dark side. And the best possible example I can think to give when discussing this is Palpatine's mastery over Force Lightning, and even more pointedly, the Sith technique known as Force Storm. Now, it is important to understand what a Force Storm and what Force Lightning really are, because if you think that they're just composed of regular storm elements like lightning, you would be very wrong. Beginning with Force Lightning, let's start with what is it? At its most essential, Force Lightning is actually a very adaptable, neutral technique that was discovered and refined by the Sith, but which was also usable by the Jedi without invoking the dark side. This was something which was unveiled by Jedi Master Plo Koon when he developed the Electric Justice technique. If placed under a Chaos God, Force Lightning would likely be described as belonging to the domain of Slaanesh, for while Force Lightning is sorcerous to some degree by its very nature, the actual core of the technique relies on extremity, not knowledge or even direct intention. Force Lightning is what occurs when a Force user channels the raw stuff of the Force through the lens of their heart and mind. The soul and emotion of the user flavors and augments the nature of the lightning that is expressed, and the ability of the user to channel this raw, destructive force is what largely controls its magnitude and power. The Son of Mortis expressed red, pain-inducing lightning. Plo Koon expressed yellow, debilitating lightning. Palpatine expressed bright blue, corruptive and destructive lightning. While blue is the most common color of this kind of lightning, it is also the most variable, its meanings ranging from the absolute average to the height of the power's purity, and none could wield it quite like Darth Sidious. Why? Because Darth Sidious was perfect for Force Lightning in nearly every single way. His heart was black as the void of space, and his mind sharper than the Darksaber's edge, so the lens through which the power was shaped was able to vary the effect at will, causing pain, debilitation, and absolute annihilation at his whim. Coupled with that was his ability to draw in more of the Force and its etheric substance than nearly any other Force user in the galaxy, with the single exception of Anakin Skywalker and later his son. When combined, he could create torrents of power which could destroy or cripple entire fleets with ease, a feat he could manage even in his weakest and most frail state. His ability to channel the raw power of the Force and to corrupt it with his mind was such that his skill with Force Lightning extended out into his skills with using the technique of Force Storm as well. What is a Force Storm, you may ask? Well, it's less than a hop and a skip away from a literal warp storm in Warhammer 40k. A Force Storm is created when a sufficiently powerful mind or will is able to harness their hatred and passion to such an extent that it can become like a metaphysical spear, which can then be used to puncture and rupture the very fabric of time, space, matter, and even the very skin of the Force itself. The result of doing this is the creation of a hateful vortex of raw power, bleeding out into reality from the netherworld of the Force. The converging and violated forces of reality twist and rip around the seams of this new storm, and today, nothing is known to directly resist contact with that barrier. That being said, a Force storm is, first and foremost, a rip in the fabric of reality, and so, using unparalleled control, Palpatine was able to use his Force storms not only for destruction, but for transportation, and often both at the same time. An example of this comes from the Dark Empire comics, where Palpatine was able to destroy a vast portion of Coruscant's surface, and in the same process abduct Luke and R2-D2 from the planet, transporting them into one of his prison ships in the process. Palpatine's skill with Force storms is unrivaled in all of the Sith. Even Valkorion was never shown to possess such raw, destructive might with the same accessibility as Palpatine. The Galactic Emperor destroyed entire fleets of vessels with this power, and in one of his deaths, destroyed himself with it as well, along with the entire Eclipse Super Star Destroyer. Palpatine, a man who radiated dark power so heavily he caused ambient mutations in people, objects, and weather around himself, could also tear open the Star Wars equivalent of a warp storm virtually at will. To give some contrast between Palpatine and other users of Force storms, let us examine Darth Revan, a renowned Lord of the Sith who is credited as a precursor to Anakin Skywalker himself. Darth Revan knew how to create Force storms, but his were far more localized, only able to create them within his own physical line of sight, and only able to form comparatively small storms, ones which could devastate groups of his foes, but not rend entire armies apart. There is simply no comparison between the two, and even when we compare Palpatine to the biggest devastators among the Sith, we still find that he tends to rank above them. Darth Nihilus could devour every living soul on an entire planet in a very short amount of time, but Palpatine was shown to destroy moons and ripped Coruscant's planet-wide city apart with his Force storm, and the price he pays for that power is minuscule and virtually non-existent compared to the price that Nihilus was forced to pay for his own planet-devastating strength. Naga Sadow could tear stars apart, but he required extensive preparations to do so, and required his meditation sphere to even attempt the act. These conditions do not seem to apply to Palpatine. And lastly, Darth Sidious, a 50 or 60-year-old man, was able to challenge Yoda, an over 800 years old Jedi Master, in lightsaber combat, facing off against him after having slain some of the greatest Jedi swordsmen in the entirety of the Order. Palpatine was an absolute blade master, having full grasp over every single Jedi lightsaber form, something we can also attribute to his amalgamated soul. Many of you may roll your eyes now, remembering that duel between Yoda and Palpatine and Windu and Palpatine, and wonder how he can be so powerful and yet driven to such a challenge by the two of them. To that, I have two counters. Firstly, Mace Windu was using Vapad, a technique which allowed Windu to absorb and redirect the dark side of his opponent, turning it into strength for himself. This is why Vapad has been so effective in my own series, by the way, because it could cause Windu to legitimately rival and challenge a being like Sidious by virtue of its function alone, making Windu more powerful as Sidious became more powerful. Under normal circumstances, Windu would likely have died much sooner in that fight, but since he was not only a practitioner of the Vapad fighting style, but also the undisputed master of the technique, he had a fighting chance against Sidious. And as for Yoda, well, that fight may not have been as contested as you may believe, for in the midst of their final battle, as Yoda gave all of himself to the fight, this is what is described from Yoda's perspective within the novelization of Revenge of the Sith. Quote, In that lightning-speared tornado of feet and fists and blades and bashing machines, his vision finally pierced the darkness that clouded the Force. Finally, he saw the truth. This truth. That he, the Avatar of Light, supreme master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most implacable, most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known, just didn't have it. He'd never had it. He lost before he started. He lost before he was born. The Sith had changed. The Sith had grown, had adapted, had invested 1,000 years of intensive study into every aspect of not only the Force, but Jedi lore itself in preparation for exactly this day. The Sith had remade themselves. The Sith had become new. This is what is described to us inside of the novelization. These are Yoda's realizations and thoughts as he loses his battle with Darth Sidious. Yoda ended up retreating well in advance of their actual duel, funneling down to a decisive end, precisely because he sensed that he not only had no chance to win, but also that if the darkness was to be eventually cast down, he would need to save his knowledge for one worthy of performing the task. Sidious allowed him to flee for 2 reasons. Firstly, he wanted Yoda to run. He wanted the great master of his hated enemy to be made a rat, to flee for his life, to hide like a speck, to, in action as well as defeat, be shown as nothing more than vermin running before the stomping feet of the true master of the galaxy. And the second reason was even more immediate. Sidious knew that hunting and killing Yoda, even in a continued, dedicated duel, could take hours to finish, and Darth Sidious sensed in that moment that Darth Vader did not have hours left to live. But rest assured, and be confident in this knowledge, dear fans, Yoda could never and was never going to be able to win a battle against Darth Sidious. Mace Windu and his Vape-Pad fighting style had the greatest chance for victory since he would force Sidious to compete with his own strength. But without that technicality, defeating Sidious was an impossible feat for all save perhaps one Jedi, and Sidious had subverted that man into his service before the duel with Yoda had even begun. Yoda was nearly 1,000 years old, and his name literally meant warrior. He was a famed hunter of darkness, a proud and true knight of the light side, and an exemplar of what the Jedi should be on a personal level, even if he did fail to lead his order to the level he had achieved. And he stood no chance at all against Sidious, even if he was skilled enough to force the Dark Lord to be strained during their duel. This is my interpretation of Sidious, as written by both the canon sources and the Legends sources. And frankly, I could keep going on and on. The destruction of the Sumu Verminoth, his bleeding of the Death Star's Kyber crystals, his biological survival after being infected with the Aroth 6 death virus, his various duels with Darth Vader, his victories in combat against Luke Skywalker, his successful ritual to turn the Force itself against the Jedi Order, and much more. His prowess in telekinesis can rival and surpass that of Starkiller, and, as shown in the Dark Empire comics, he could, when directly involving himself, directly aid in and create some of the most terrifying soldiers, machines, and monsters the galaxy had ever seen or ever known, not unlike a certain Emperor of Mankind himself once did, though not to the same scale. In short, Palpatine is a brick shithouse of dark side power, and even within the 40k power scaling system, he can only be approached, even approached, by the most powerful and well-trained psychers in the galaxy. Palpatine has proved that he can defeat Force users with higher midichlorian counts than himself by merely outdoing them with 1,000+ years of Sith teachings and knowledge, and he does so relatively easily. I mean, consider this. Even Abeloth, The dark side goddess of the galaxy, insofar as Star Wars is concerned, never approached or made herself known or felt by Palpatine, evidently hiding from his wandering eye for reasons we can only conjecture. For those who still rail against this, I will grant you this one thing. Palpatine, as I will interpret him, is badly represented in the films. Like, it doesn't make him uncanonized, not to that degree, but he is badly represented, showing himself to have a great blind spot in the form of his own arrogance, his unending pride. But it is a specific kind of arrogance, a specific kind of short-sightedness. He is never shown to reach his full power in the movies, and that does impact my interpretation, but for the most part, his weakness of pride only manifests when he is facing off against lightsiders, failing to respect them or to take them seriously. He uses against them his vilest force lightning, not his most powerful, but his vilest, his most pain-inducing, most corruptive, the kind that he can't stop at will, the kind that simply goes and goes until his thirst for death has been satisfied with the painful extinguishing of a Jedi life. We see this twice in canon, and both times it leads to his destruction, and both times it's because Palpatine honestly, truly does not believe that lightsiders can even rival or really truly challenge the dark side. He 100% buys into that the dark side is categorically superior to the light side, and darksiders are superior to lightsiders who use the light side. You know, for example, as we see in the Clone Wars, he fights Maul more seriously than he fights Yoda. He uses 2 lightsabers and performs many more feats of speed and strength than he did in the movies when fighting Yoda. For when he went to face off against Maul, he did not see Maul as a pretentious upstart or a pathetic opponent or some lowly enemy to be crushed underfoot. He perceived him in the way that he called him, a rival. Even if an unmatched rival, even if a rival he could easily destroy, he still saw Maul as a rival. And he acted on that motivation with a level of skill and strength that he does not deign to reveal to the Jedi, whom he does not see as rivals to the Sith, but as mere pretenders to power, no more than historical foes, long since outdistanced and defeated when it comes to the mastery of the metaphysical powers they both seek to utilize. And with that, I do believe that I will bring this video to its close. Behold, the Galactic Emperor of Star Wars. Behold the true might of the Sith fulfilled. And know that even in the grim darkness of the far future, there are still beings to fear long before the birth of Slaanesh, born and shaped a long time ago in a galaxy which is far away. This is the Sidious that you will see, and this is Sidious as I see him. This is the last Dark Lord of the Sith. Thank you for hanging around and hearing my spiel. I hope this was elucidating, and I hope it will give you a proper context with which to watch the next episode of Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k, which I am creating. As the vote in my community section has dictated, I will be making a long episode again. Probably not as long as the last one. The last one was very long, very hard. But I will be making it long. It should be at least an hour, maybe 2 hours. You know, something lengthy for you to enjoy. Yeah, I am very much looking forward to seeing your reactions to what happens at the end of that particular episode, and I will say no more about it than that. However, I will add this in for those of you who are interested in meeting me, speaking to me, and playing a game with me. I am currently a new professional paid GM on the Start Playing platform. I'll put a link to it down in the description down below. I am currently running a campaign of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition on the platform of Fantasy Grounds. in which I can share maps, move tokens around. It's a pretty great platform, and thanks to me owning the Ultimate Edition, it's entirely free for you to use. You just have to get the demo version, and my version upgrades your version to match me. Yeah, I'm gathering players for this right now. There are 4 slots for additional players left. So if you think I'd make a great GM and you want to experience playing a game with me, I have a custom module in a custom-made world with an adventure you've never seen before. And if that is sort of your bag, if that is something that you're interested in, feel free to check it out and sign up if I entice you. But with that being said, I will see you guys next time in the next video. So long.